Well, thanks everyone, and thank y'all for being here. This is quite a crowd. Didn't really know where this was going when Rick said, "Hey, let's." I told Rick I put together this presentation to help my economic development brethren understand a little bit about electricity, kind of electricity 101. So I'm going to be the basics guy today, and Brad's going to be the future looking guy today with respect to electricity and what's going on out there. But I told Rick, I said, yeah, there's just some things right down to the basics of watts, volts, and amps I want to talk about. So the economic development professionals have a little bit better understanding of what we're talking about and what their clients are talking about. Well, he says, hey, let's just do a lunch and learn. Well, I had no idea he was going to bring all of you together. So this is great, and glad to see you. I see a lot of old friends, Ramiro and Mark and Teklo, and when I say old friends, I'm talking about friends I've been friends with a long time, not old Teklo. I'm not calling you old. So let's a little bit about me. Well, before I do that, I also have I brought the A team from AEP to help me with the tough questions. So when y'all get there, I've got Hill Koch and Danny Lucio, external affairs managers. Hill down in Brownsville area, Danny up here. I got Martin Valdez, and then Rick is. Did Rick come? No. Those guys. Martin is our key accounts manager and works a lot of these large load projects. So be sure and meet those guys if you don't already know them. Hey, this is AEP, and we start off just about every presentation or every meeting with a safety moment. So that's where I'm going to start today, if y'all will let me. Here's a little bit about what we're going to talk about. I'm going to give you my background in just a moment. For safety, believe it or not, sometimes those wires come off the poles. Now, they usually do it because there's a high wind, a storm, a truck pulls them down, somebody runs into a pole. And so I just want to have a little bit of a safety moment about downed wires. Never assume that they're off or that they're not live. You can't see it always. You can't taste it. You can't smell it. It could be live. They're dangerous. Keep at least 25 feet away. And then the big thing, if you've never thought about it, if you've ever been involved in an accident and there's a wire laying across your car, what do? Do you get out or do you stay put? If it's not on fire, just stay there. If you can just stay there. But if you have to get out, jump from the car. And where both feet are coming off of the car at the same time, hitting the ground at the same time, and then you shuffle away. So you don't become the connective circuit from the car to the ground. That's a bad thing. So there's our safety moment. If you didn't learn anything else today, maybe you learned that one thing. A little bit about, before I get into this, about myself. As mentioned in Rick's introduction, I've been in economic development for over 35 years, but I started my career as a kid with Central Power and Light Company. Doing marketing and eventually transitioned into economic development. The last year I was there, it became AEP, and I spent about 5 years doing economic development then for a very small geographic region that AEP served up along the northern Gulf Coast or mid Gulf Coast. That was when we had lots of economic development people. And then I transitioned into the community economic development for over 20 years. I led a community economic development operations, so I really do know what some of you guys are going through in the room. And then about 4 years ago, many of you probably know or remember Ray Covey. He was Mr. Economic Development at AEP, and he retired, and it gave me an opportunity to come back to my roots with AEP about 4 years ago. And listen, while I was doing community economic development, I thought I had an advantage over my peers because, I had electricity in my background. And I knew something about all that. Well, when I came back 4 years ago, it was at an unprecedented time in Texas with more projects and a larger volume of projects than we've ever seen before. Some of you guys know what I'm talking about. And then not only more projects, but more large electric load projects than we've ever seen before. And I learned that this kid really didn't know that much about electricity when it comes to these large transmission level projects and what it takes to serve a larger transmission project. And we'll talk about that just a little bit. So there's actually a difference between your traditional manufacturing project that we're all chasing and some of these very large load projects. And that's why I put this presentation together. So we're going to start with the basics. What is electricity? And, electricity or electric power is just simply the rate at which electrical energy is transformed into work. Whether it's spinning a motor or running a furnace or a conveyor system or a pump, that's electric power. And there's voltage, and you understand voltage is basically the potential differences between those 2 points. Consider it sort of the pressure, if you will, that's pushing that electricity on through the lines. And then there's amps. And I know this is probably way more deep and detailed than you thought you were going to get here, but later on, there's some associations between all these things that might click. And then there's amps, which is the measure of the flow of the electric charge in a circuit. So if you will, you kind of think of the voltage like the water pressure, and the more pressure you have, the more water you can have come out of the end of the spigot. So just keep those into your mind because the electric folks and your clients will be asking you about voltages. They'll be asking you about power and how much power they need to take off of the system, and understanding these relationships matter. And these things are all connected mathematically. In the basic sense of the terms, if you take amps times the volts, you can get the power or the power capability. And so those things are all connected. I know I'm going fast because there's a lot of information to exchange. I'll hang around later, or you can call me if you have more questions. So let's talk a little bit about the measure of electricity. This is an important term, demand. Anybody here from the governor's office? Governor's Office of Economic Development? Hey there. We need to talk sometime. How many of you guys get leads from the governor's office? Sometimes the client tells those folks what we need to know, and sometimes they don't. And they may say, we need 5 million kilowatt hours. And AEP says, it doesn't matter. We need to know the demand. We need to know the rate at which you want to take that electricity, because that's what we have to build infrastructure for. So electric demand is important. It's measured in watts or kilowatts. Most of your homes and small businesses are going to be kilowatts. But then there's megawatts, which would be 1,000 kilowatts. And then the past 2 or 3 years, we're hearing a new term that we almost never heard, even 5 years ago, and that's gigawatts. So this is the term 60 watts. Just as this example, a 60-watt light bulb basically requires 60 watts to turn it on and to keep it on. Now there's another, so I've been trying to come up with a correlation between a visual of watts. So see in the upper left-hand corner, that's a megawatt. Let's assume that's a megawatt. A large big box retailer that has refrigeration, air conditioning, and lighting would use about a megawatt. So some of your small manufacturers around are 10 to 20 megawatts easily. I mean, I know of one 600 job manufacturer that uses about 6 to 10 megawatts. It has 600 jobs, 1 million square feet, 6 to 10 megawatts. That's not so much. Some of your big petrochemical plants that we have along the Gulf Coast range anywhere from 100 to 600 megawatts. And then that other big thing is a gigawatt. We probably have right now, Hill, what do you think, 15 projects, signed agreements for gigawatt projects right now. That's crazy. AEP Texas last summer, I think our max load demand was 8.5, somewhere around 8.5 gigawatts. So if we serve all those projects that we have signed agreements for in the next 5 years, we'll double or triple the size of AEP Texas. That's what a gigawatt is. And I wanted you to have an understanding of that. So when you say, Dale, why is it taking so long to serve this project? You served all my other projects in 6 months. So nobody has a gigawatt worth of extra infrastructure just sitting around. And there's a reason for that. We'll talk about that later. A little bit about measures of electricity, the consumption. We talked about consumption. If you take a 1 kW, say a light bulb, and you run that 1 kW for an hour, how many kilowatt hours do you think you're going to have? 1 kilowatt hour, right? So that's what most of us pay for on our residential bills is kilowatt hours. The commercial and large industrial projects, their demand and their the way they use their power, which we kind of call their load profiles, impact what they pay. And so the rate at which that they take electricity makes a difference. So if you had 3 of these 1 kW light bulbs, what would your demand be if they were all burning at the same time? It would be 3 kW, right? Now, if you used all of them for 5 hours, that'd be 15. When I first saw this, I thought, hey, they got that wrong. It should be 15 kilowatt hours. Well, but no, you notice all the lights aren't on at the same time. Therefore, there's a load profile that's going to impact those customers. And we're going to ask this a lot of times. We may ask of your client, okay, it's 10 megawatts, but what's the load factor? Are they going to be running that 10 megawatts all the time, 24/7, or not? Because that can impact how we view that infrastructure. Let me give you an example of that. Well, the next slide is sort of an example of that. Here's a commercial or a office building, and it's just showing their load for a month. Why do you think there's 5 spikes and then 2 dips, and then 5 spikes and 2 dips? Anybody?
It's weeks. It can be the
week. Yeah, it's a week and a weekend, right? So they're on all day, and then they cut off for 2 days, and they're on all day. So it's not 100% load factor, right? So they may use 6 megawatts, but not all the time. And so that's important to know. These are some of the things that we will be asking your clients when we're trying to figure out what kind of a customer they are. Sometimes a customer will add up all the equipment that they have, and they say, well, this is the load we need. But we happen to know there's typically some diversity in that load, and all that stuff's usually not running all at the same time. And so the more sophisticated clients will understand that information, and they'll be able to share that with us. And it does impact how we work with them. So now let's talk about the grid. Now, you use the term grid, and it means multiple different things to different people. But I'm going to look at it very holistically as the grid in Texas consists of generators, transmission wires, distribution wires, and customers. But really, the grid is really more the wires. I still think generators are a part of that, and we're going to talk about generators briefly. But let's start. We're just talking about the transmission portion. We call it the big wires. You got big wires. Y'all ever notice that? You got big wires, and you got smaller wires, and then you got really small wires. Okay? We can be that simple with it. Well, those really big wires, the transmission wires, and there are a variety of voltages. At AEP Texas, is 69 kV, 138 kV kilovolts, and 345 kilovolts. For a long time, that 345 was reserved for, and really has been, the backbone of the Texas electric system. And that's what we move power of the greater distances with that 345. And 138 and 69 kV. 69 was a lot of residential, small commercial, and 138 is what we served a lot of our industrial load with. But about 5 years ago, I think it's 5 years ago, we at Central Valley Light Company, I think, put our first 345 customer on line because the amount of load that they needed and our ability to provide that load, we had to put them on the 345 kV backbone. And today, all of those projects I mentioned earlier are wanting to be on the 345. So all of a sudden, the 345 is not really just a backbone moving power around the state. It's serving in-use customers. And that's an unusual thing. And I know Brad's going to talk about it more, but just about 4 weeks ago, AEP, the PUC approved the next generation transmission for Texas, which is a 765 kVA transmission line. They're going to start coming out of West Texas. I'll let Brad talk about that. AEP's already announced that we're going to be building one of those legs starting now, basically, in terms of engineering and planning. But this is sort of what that transmission lines look like. You've seen all the big towers ranging in size. I did mention 69. We still have some 69 kVA around here. We're hoping to transition most of that to 138 over the next many years. But be aware, that's bigger power serving industrial type loads. Now, here's some of the transmission and switch stations. You've seen these. Now, if you have a customer that's going to be served off of transmission, this is what gets different for economic developers. They're going to need space for a substation. They're going to need their own substation. What is that? 10, 20 acres? Maybe if it's 345 substation, could easily be 20 acres or more even. Well, for their own, it may not be. We're going to need space and some acreage to build a switch station coming off of that transmission line. See, so that's all of a sudden very differently. We're talking to many folks around the region about business parks. Usually when you develop a business park, we put in distribution level, which we're fixing to talk about, power. But I assure you, as soon as you have a business park that has some new electric infrastructure in it, somebody's going to show up with a small data center, and they're going to want a piece of that business center, and they're going to want to connect to transmission level power. The rights of ways needed for a 345 kV transmission line, that's the big stuff, is about 150 feet. For a 138, it's 100 feet. 69, I don't really know, but we wouldn't do a 69 today anyway. It would be 138. So all of a sudden, you got to think, in your business park, did you reserve 100-foot extra right of way for a big transmission line to come through to serve that project? Be thinking about that. Now, let's talk about distribution. We transmit power on the transmission system, and then we run it through a substation with some transformers, and we drop it down to a smaller voltage, and we call that distribution. Our distribution at AEP is 12,470, or nominally 12,000 kV. All those wires running around your neighborhood and your commercial districts at AEP are typically, they look kind of like that. I know they're ugly, but we like the electricity, so they are what they are. And I know people want to put those underground. Some of those could go underground. It just gets a little bit more expensive. And those are 12,000 volts, and we run that through a transformer, and it goes to whatever the customer wants. Commercial customers, it's a variety of voltages. Residential is usually 120 and 240 volt going to them. There's some examples of the transformers that are hanging on the poles, or you see the boxes on the ground. Those are pad-mounted transformers where they've dropped the distribution down, gone underground close to the business, and put that pad-mounted transformer there. I'll give you notice this little thing right here called a fuse. Early in my career, when I figured out what that was, I thought, man, that is good to know. Have you ever been in your home and you heard the shotgun blast go off and the power goes out? Well, if you happen to look out in your backyard and you see one of those things hanging down, you know your fuse just blew. Let the service guys know where it's at, and you'll get your power on quicker, because they're driving around the neighborhood looking for that fuse right there. So there's your free bonus for today's presentation. And let me catch up with my notes, because I want to talk about this one. So let's talk a little bit about the market structure in Texas. Back in 1999, and I guess 2000 might have been the first full year of deregulation, the Texas legislature had the bright idea of let's deregulate the electric industry in Texas. Before that time, you had what's called integrated utilities. AEP, or Central Power and Light, before them, we owned generation plants, we owned all the wires, transmission, distribution, and we sold the power to the end customer. And through a deregulated environment, it was basically thought that we could let the market drive some of these activities, and it would end up being better and cheaper. Well, I don't know how it's come out for everyone, but I know industrial and large commercial customers, it's probably come out cheaper. But now generation is completely separate, and they are any new generator in Texas, unless they have a dedicated load, is basically a merchant plant. And ERCOT brings them on as ERCOT needs them to run to satisfy the electric load for that day. And then you have the people that are still regulated, the wires companies, transmission and distribution companies like us, and we're still regulated. And our portion of the bill basically is just the transportation fee that the customers get charged for moving that power from the generator to them. And they never actually get a bill from us. We bill their retail energy provider, which is the next spot that I want to talk about. But while we're talking about this one, I think it's kind of interesting on the generators, and as it relates to economic developers. How many of you have received a request for information or a proposal from a client that says, I want 100% renewable energy, or you get more credit in your process if you can give them 100% renewable energy? Well, that's because the marketplace is pushing some of these manufacturers to manufacture their products with that kind of power. Now, I will tell you, this recent craze with the data centers and what have you, they're being less picky about that. They just want electricity. But this is and this is a little dated, this slide on what the fuel mix is in Texas. So it's a little challenge to say, yeah, you're getting 100% wind or you're getting 100% solar or whatever, because, electricity just doesn't work that way. It gets on the grid and then you take it off. But if you contract with a retail provider that their portfolio is full of renewable energy, then you can theoretically say most of our power is from a renewable source. Now, to say that 100%, you may not be able to run your plant during the nighttime or if the wind's not blowing, but I saw this slide was kind of dated, and then of course you don't know what time of day, but that was showing the mixes of wind energy. So I got on ERCOT's grid, and it's kind of interesting. You might want to do this sometime. If you get on the website of ERCOT and just type in, just Google ERCOT fuel mix, and this graph will pop up. Today, this morning at 8 o'clock, Texas ERCOT was about 30%, almost 31% wind, 25% solar, 25% gas, 9% coal, 8% nuclear. So that was the fuel mix in Texas. Now, there's a whole lot more natural gas, a little bit more wind, a little bit more solar that could have been used, but that was pretty much maxing it out today. And that's what the mix looks like. Thought you might find that interesting. Let's talk a little bit about the market structure. There's basically three big grids across the United States: Eastern Interconnection, Western Interconnection, and then there's ERCOT right in the middle, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas. I guess this is a good point to say because we get this question, and you remember several years ago it was kind of a big debate. Well, whenever we had the Winter Storm Uri, it's a big debate whether maybe we would have been better off if we were connected to those other grids. Well, that was such a unique situation where the whole state of Texas was below freezing for multiple days. That doesn't happen very often. Never happened in my lifetime. I know that would have been a knee-jerk reaction, and I've heard many officials and certainly company executives at AEP say, one of the bright things about ERCOT being on its own and only in Texas is when we need to respond to the marketplace, we can do it. This 765 deal for transmission is an example of that. It just took the Public Utility Commission of Texas to decide that we're going to go do that, and we're going to do that. The legislature tried to weigh in a little bit, and they could have, but it's just one regulatory body. These other operations, the other independent system operators, they've got multiple regulatory bodies, multiple state legislators before they can make big change as responding to the marketplace. So that's one of the big advantages for ERCOT being on their own. Plus, it also keeps us from being regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, and that's probably a good thing as well. Just another kind of explains the different system operators around the country, ERCOT, and where the others are. And you can see about 90% of Texas is ERCOT, and about 10% is some other system. And you may or may not have realized that we have some sister companies up in the Oklahoma and the Panhandle area, but then also in Northeast Texas. But ERCOT is a big part of that, and it's all an island. Shows it a little bit more cleanly. When ERCOT was put together. Let me read this to you. ERCOT's basically 4 mandates are to mainstream the system reliability, facilitate a competitive wholesale market, facilitate a competitive retail market, and ensure open access to transmission. And so ERCOT is sort of the, if ERCOT was standing before you, they would call themselves a traffic cop that kind of directs the traffic and keeps everything working in tandem. Now, there's something else we haven't talked about much, and that's we did talk about generation. That's another portion of the overall deregulated, or I don't like to use deregulated. I like to say the competitive ERCOT market, because that's an important distinction. And then there's the retail energy provider, and you see how that retail energy provider is between the generators and the consumers. Those reps go out and purchase power from generators, and then they resell it to the end user, whether that's a manufacturer, industrial client, or you at your house. I mean, all of you, if you're on AEP service lines, you have the ability to go out there and shop, if you will, for the best price electricity. I don't know how many of y'all do that. I never did that. I chose one electric provider and I just stayed on it. And now I just moved into a house that's on a rural co-op. And so now I don't have that choice. I just use that rural co-op. This is an important distinction for you guys on your industrial customers. Now here's what happens, and I'm sure some of you have had this happen, especially on a foreign direct investment company. They've come in and they want to say, can you provide the power? Yes, we can provide the power. And how much is it going to cost? And you call up AEP, and what do we say? I don't know. Because we don't know. That's not what we do. We sell the transportation cost, which is a small portion of your bill. And those end users have to go to a retail energy provider and either shop or bid their power. Many of the big boys are using consultants that are very well versed in the marketplace and know what's out there. When I was with a community economic development, I actually hired a consultant to do rate analysis for my clients. I could give them the load profile of the client. They could come back and say, over the past 6 months, here's what we're seeing in the marketplace, an average of this cost for that type of a project. And that would help me give the client a guesstimation of what they might end up using. Now, also, you can send them to, let's see if this website, is this thing moving? Whoops, there we go. Well, I went too far. You can send them to the PUC website under, and get the retail energy providers that are listed there. There's over 140. I think that's in another slide, a later slide. But as an economic developer, I encourage you to take the time to go onto that website and find the list of business retail energy providers, because you don't want to give them a list of 140 providers, and a lot of those providers are only targeting residential and small commercial customers. So don't send those to your industrial clients. Go find the list and send that to them of the industrial type providers. This slide is just kind of showing the market structure. These are all the transmission distribution utilities across the state according to AECT. Some of those are in ERCOT, some of them are not. You can see that red at the bottom and the blue up in kind of North Texas. That's AEP Texas. But now, do you notice a lot of white space? So that's not everything. In Texas, there's also a large number of cooperatives. And I think there's over, 72 municipalities. When Texas deregulated, if you will, or went to this competitive marketplace, they gave rural co-ops and municipalities the option of not opting into competition. They could maintain their captive customers and not let them have access to competition, and they could, grow with their region and live happily ever after. Most of them have chosen to do that. One, Nueces Electric down in the Corpus Christi region did opt into competition, and so anyone on the ERCOT competitive market can buy from them. It's worked out really well for them because, as I understand it, there's not many retail providers that are willing to go into that marketplace. So they have all their customers plus some outside customers. But that's the differences. And there's many areas, and most of you economic developers know this, where the territories kind of overlap, where maybe it's AEP, maybe it's Rio Grande Valley Electric, or Brownsville, you have PUB. So sometimes it's all the above. When those situations happen, the customer kind of gets a choice of where they want to be. And I like to just say, when you're on the competitive market wires like AEPs, those clients have the opportunity to go out and bid their energy use. That, in my opinion, is one of the reasons that Texas has had seen so much growth over the past 10 years, is because the large electric users are sophisticated enough to understand this system, because it is complicated. They understand the system and they know how to work it to get them some of the lowest energy cost in the nation. And so even though it's confusing for us, and it's certainly confusing for some of your clients when they first get here, once they figure it out, they like it. I think I'm fixing to get into some slides that I probably already covered because I get ahead of myself. Of course, you have the retail providers. There was one more slide I wanted to. Oh, there we go. This is an interesting slide. This actually comes right out from ERCOT. Some years ago, ERCOT basically had to worry about that top portion. You know, you had to forecast what the weather was going to do. You had some base load generators, and you got to make sure which ones of those are going to be online, and maybe make some predictions of their fuel costs, and forecast what your load's going to look like. And you remember, and for an electric system to work, the generation has to match the load. And this is where it gets really complicated for ERCOT. We try to match it. So when it's being made, it's being used. Well, 10 or 15 years later, well, I won't stay there. That lower graph is what it looks like today. You have wind and solar, good sources, just intermittent. The wind doesn't always blow. The sun's not shining at night. So now we put batteries. Batteries are an important part of the grid to make it function today. Early in the morning and late in the evening, the batteries sometimes pick up the load where we wouldn't be able to be successful if we didn't have the batteries. You know, everybody gets up and turns on the lights and starts cooking and doing things like that, but the sun hadn't quite come up yet. Well, so we don't have any solar. And then late in the evening, it's still warm in South Texas late in the evening, but the sun's going down and we don't have the solar. So we need that battery. And so it just made our system way more complicated. And that's something that ERCOT is in charge of balancing that act. Here's just a slide of the Public Utility Commission, which regulates all of these things. And finally, here's just a look of other states around the country that are in a deregulated or open to competition, or quasi open to competition. A lot more states are fully integrated like we used to be than deregulated. But again, this system is driving business to Texas. And there is sort of an outline of where AEP Texas serves. Obviously, those are the counties we serve. We don't serve all of those counties because I've already mentioned rural co-ops serve portions of that as well. A lot of information. I should have told you to ask questions along the way, but any questions? All right. Oh,
I'll take one. If there's a company that's say adjacent and maybe like the close, but they're a certified radio, is there an opportunity to get it into AEP?
Here's the way it works. Here's the way it works today. If a single consuming facility has property that crosses multiple utility service territories, they get to choose which one serves them. But if it's all in one service territory, then that's who serves them. Now, sometimes there's sort of a hybrid, and Brad may even talk about this here in a moment. There are opportunities where someone else's infrastructure is in our service territory, and it makes more sense for us rather than build new infrastructure to use that utility's infrastructure, and we'll have an agreement with them. And the same thing happens to us. We may have a transmission line running through the cooperative's territory, and they may want to have an agreement with AEP to use our infrastructure to serve them. So there's some give and take that way, but the customer still ends up being pretty much whatever service territory you're in. And the exception, Ramiro, is when it crosses the line, when their site crosses the line. Now, if it's multiple customers, say it's a retail development and it has 10 customers, well, then whichever customers are on our side of the line, we serve, and what customers are on their side of the line, they service. Good question. Thank you. Because that happens a lot. Yes, sir.
I have a question. When we had the weather, man, and she goes back to me, just jumped all of the stuff that are in the Texas grid as a magnet, stuck together with bubble down. So, you know, as an insider, thing knows about this, you're saying, well, no, when you have an anomaly like that, it doesn't matter what the structure was, and nothing to handle it all. We kept or maybe because of setting on up with really big studies to have that like that all the time. So are you saying then that really, with the exception of those kind of dust, there's really nothing wrong? It's just fine?
I'm saying there were things that we could do to make that better, which ERCOT did implement, and that's really was getting those power generators to weatherize so that we didn't have multiple generation go down. And that was more of a generation issue than it was a transmission issue. But to say that the grid is just fine, yeah, it's just fine for the load we have right now today. But we know that it's not going to stay that way. So we still have to continue to grow and improve it. Just because looking down the road at all the large loads that are coming, no, we've got a lot of work to do to maintain the level of reliability that we have grown to expect and appreciate. Good question. Thank you. Yes, Mark.
But yeah, it's but this is my I don't when we were looking at the TikTok that good stats that in that is also the time the then boil out on if that's done there, it's about the add.
Thank you, Mark. Mark asked about the lead times. Okay, yes, it's gotten better. COVID did a couple of things. Obviously, it hurt us from a supply chain perspective, but also what's going on is the sheer volume of projects that are going on around the country and the amount of projects that need to be built. So that's taking up a lot of the infrastructure as well. It has gotten better. The COVID issue seems like on transformers. We even had challenges with poles, wire. Right now, the big one is breakers, 345 breakers and 138 breakers. And it may take 2 or 3 years. I hear that's getting better on that. And so that's an important distinction, Mark, because most of you, many times we work these projects and they're distribution level projects. We can serve them with 5 or 6 or 10 megawatts. And I know some large projects in terms of job creation, they're only less than 10 megawatts, 5 megawatts. We can serve those off of our distribution system. But when you get up into the 25, 30 and above megawatts, now we're talking about a transmission connection, and it requires some of that equipment you're talking about. And the timelines stretch out 24 months, 36 months. That's why it's so important to bring us on early. And let's talk to those clients early. It used to be not a big deal because it may take a couple of years to build a petrochemical plant, and those were our big ones. But a data center could be operational in 12 months, 18 months, and take a large amount of length. So, yeah, let's start talking early on those. Thank you all.